Hi, this is my first video and I thought that I'd do some very small chunks that I can post in individual segments and then people can follow as much or as little as they want to. So I'm going to start with my previous lifetime, and that was a lifetime I lived before I became Gillian. I was married, I had a couple of very young children, I had a quite well-known husband. I'm not even going to go into detail about it because it's completely irrelevant who he was. And most of the time he was away gallivanting, just doing his thing. He was promoting his own businesses, he was working in his own interests in the field he worked in. And he wasn't at home very much, but we had kind of a fairy tale start to our relationship. We both met in school, we were together, we were inseparable. I absolutely idolised this guy, and we had a couple of kids together. We had a beautiful white wedding, we built our own house, well, more or less, and we moved into it. Everything seemed to be going really well, and we were still quite young, and it just reached a point where things weren't going well, and basically he started to become unhappy. He started having to take medication, we were fighting. I mean, a lot of this started years beforehand, like every single time he had to go away somewhere, and I would say to him, you're missing the children growing up, you're missing their childhood. I feel like I'm always here on my own. When is our family going to be more important? And he would always promise me maybe another year or so, and then I'll be spending more time at home and things will start becoming easier. And I believed that for a long time. I wanted to. I believed in him, and I always heard from other people that he was cheating on me, he was seeing other women, and I always felt like he was much better looking than I was, and I didn't think I was pretty at all, and I'd only ever really had him, and he would swear that he wasn't doing anything like that, but he probably was, to be fair. Anyway, to cut a long story short, one day I was at home and one of his employees was working on our grounds, and we started having a conversation. Things were already going very downhill with my marriage, and this guy made me realise I was, more attractive than I thought I was, and that I was still capable of having a life, and I deserved to be loved and I deserved to be appreciated. And I didn't really like him as much as I just needed someone to help me realise those things. So he wanted to run away with me and things, but I don't think I would have really gone through with that. What I did do though is I took the children to my mum and dad's, who they didn't live too far away, and basically I said the next day I was going to go and get some odds and ends for myself and for the children, and they begged me to take my brother with me and said, no, don't go alone. And I was like, oh no, he's gone, he's in Europe, he's not here this weekend, I'm safe, it's fine. So I took my Jeep, went down to our house that we'd lived in for quite some time together, and there was a weird feeling, a really, really odd feeling when I got to the front door of our kitchen, and I didn't want to listen to it. I didn't want to take any notice of it, and I thought, you're being stupid, we need underwear, we need to go in and we need to get some stuff, and stop being ridiculous, he's not here. And I went in, and the place just felt so different from how it had felt before. It was my home up until a couple of days before that, so it made no sense to be having those feelings, but I ignored them. And I went upstairs and I thought I'll get my own stuff first and then I'll get the kids' stuff afterwards. And I remember opening my bedroom door and he was there, and he was sat on the other side of the bed in like a hardback chair, and he had his head hung low and he was sort of leaning on one of his rifles. And I didn't actually speak a word to him. I didn't say anything, and yet it felt like I stood at that door for, I don't even know how long. It felt like I was there for a very long time. And I remember thinking, I really, really love him, and I could give in and go back to him, and this will all go away. And the other part of me said, no, we've needed him for too long. We need a life of our own. We need to let go, and I'm not letting him talk me out of this. And I just thought, run. And I turned and I ran, and I thought, I just need to get back to my Jeep and I just need to get out of here before he can get round the bed and get over to me. And I knew that there was a very good chance I was dying that day. And I was right. He shot me in the back. I don't really remember what happened after that. And that was that. The next thing I knew, I woke up and I was standing, bent over, looking down at something. And I just kept saying, what is that? What is it? What is that? And I stared at whatever it was I was looking at until eventually I thought, oh yeah, that used to be me. And I stood up and I was still in my house and I was a bit confused, but I turned towards the staircase. We were in sort of the hallway part of the house, and he was walking down the stairs towards me, and I looked at him and I remember thinking, oh, so he killed himself as well. And my first thought was, oh, thank God I'm not here on my own. And then my second thought was, I'm going to kill him. And I just looked and I said, what did you do? Why did you do that? And he laughed, which is incredulous, and said, I just had enough. That was that. I literally couldn't believe that he came out with it that way. That was so nonchalant. And I said, but you've just left our kids parentless. You've just left them alone. And I'd known moments before who this guy was. I'd known that we spend eternity together and that we play games together, that he's the one that I always end up playing with. I recognised him, I knew him, but in the second that the mother in me kicked back in, I literally forgot all of that. All I could feel was that my kids were there without either of us, and that one that I had to get back to them. I was so angry. I was absolutely furious. And then we skip forward a little while, I'm screaming, and a gentleman walks in. He can see both of us, and we both know who he is. I call him our guardian. He's the one who shepherds us. I'm not going to say he's God. He's not God per se. He's a representation, shall we say. And he told me that my children weren't my responsibility anymore. They were his, and that I had to let them go. And I just kept sobbing. I literally couldn't stop crying. And I remember him sitting me down on this chair and I just continued sobbing. It's all I remember doing. I couldn't do anything else. And I remember the paramedics coming in and putting me in a body bag. Sorry, I'm probably dropping my volume. And I remember watching them zip us up and carrying us out. And then I remember a conversation with our guardian and telling him I did not want to come back here, that this place was fake, that it was not real, and that I didn't want to come back here ever again. And he laughed at that, not meanly, but amused, and said, yeah, you are going back. And I said, I'm not going back, I'm not. He said that my husband was finished, he was out, he wasn't coming back, and that I hadn't finished and I needed to come back here, and the only way to leave this place permanently was to come back, be reincarnated and do it all over again until I could basically separate myself and true reality from this place. I didn't really get that. I didn't really understand it. I didn't really want to understand it. I was absolutely filled with anger. I just wanted to kill someone out. I just literally couldn't feel anything but this anger and this pain. And I remember him saying that I needed to go to my funeral and it would help me let go. I had to go and say goodbye. And I went and stood with him and watched the first 5 or 10 minutes of this funeral where they were burying our bodies. And I just couldn't do it. I had to leave, and I said to him, I can't do this, I need to go. And the next thing I knew, I think I was sitting in some kind of a church hall. There was these long red curtains and tables and people everywhere, and I'm fairly sure it must have been the wake or something, but I was still just completely beside myself, really unhappy. And he basically came to me and said, look, I have a special life for you to live next time, and I want to go and show you where you're going next. I said, okay, and he said, her name is Gillian. And he actually said, it doesn't really make any sense to me right now, but he said, she's called Gillian, she's got long blonde hair, and she can do magic. And I don't know what on earth he was talking about, because this life does not do magic. But, I mean, I've had a magical life, but I'm not sure that's quite the same thing. And I was intrigued and sort of said, okay, so show me. So he took me on a tour of my forthcoming life, and he showed me various things that were going to happen, people I was going to know. The first thing he showed me was a boy in a hospital room, and the boy he looked like he was about to leave. He was completely greyed out. He had all his parents and his family around him. They were all sobbing. And I remember we walked in the wall, and I looked at him and he said, it's fine. They can't see you. They don't know you're here. It's okay. So I walked up to this boy and I kind of leant over him and looked at him. And then I remember just looking up back at him and going, yeah, he's cute. We'll keep him. He had basically said to me that I could let him die at this stage, or I could keep him and make him part of my life. And I chose that, to keep him. I do often wonder if he knew which choice I was going to make. So I wonder whether or not I really did have a choice, but that's by the by. So we did that, He took me and showed me my school. He showed me my siblings, my home. He told me about my childhood and how that was going to go. He said I could spend a day each with both of my parents. So I could stay with my mum for a day and I could do the same with my dad. Strangely enough, I can't remember the day I spent with my dad, but I do remember spending the day with my mum, or at least some chunk of it. And she was in this house on her own. She was really young. She must have been pregnant with me because the house was more or less empty. There wasn't a great deal in it. And she went into the kitchen and drained off a tin of tomatoes at the sink and stood and drank it. It was something that she craved all the time when she was pregnant with me. Subsequently, I can't stand tomatoes or tomato juice. So yeah, and I think that ended as my dad was walking in. Where I decided I really liked my parents. At this point in time, by the time I spent that day with my mum, I was looking at things very much from the point of view of a childlike, attitude. It was as if the part of me that was sore and angry and sad had been somehow compartmentalized and put away. I wasn't thinking about it, I wasn't aware of it. It was there, it was somewhere in the background, like that compartmentalization wasn't complete. Because I remember while he was showing me my life earlier in this whole thing, I remember telling myself over and over again, I have to remember this isn't real, I have to remember this isn't real, I have to remember this isn't real. Because I was so angry. In my anger, I decided that because I was told I was going to remember my past life, I was going to remember my family, my kids, my husband, everything that happened to us. And I was told if I got in touch with them, he would take me out, my life would end. He would take me out of this incarnation. And I don't know whether or not he meant it. He probably did. But I tell a lie, I have been in touch with them. I just wanted to check on my kids. So I very subtly contacted them, but I never actually went to see them. But I always intended at that stage in time, to the second I could remember my family, I was going back there, and I didn't care what he thought about it. And I suppose on some levels, it didn't really occur to me that he could, hear every single thought I had at that stage. And he probably was listening to everything I was thinking about. But by the time I really did get to that place, I wasn't in the same frame of mind, so it really didn't matter what I felt back then. By the time I got there, that wasn't something I really had any intention to do. As it was, the last thing I wanted was to hurt my kids. And once I found out that they were all right, I basically just let go and let them be, and tried not to think about them anymore, because they're not Gillian's children, they're her children. I won't even say her name, but they're not someone I need to worry about. They're fine, they're grown up, they're not that much younger than I am, I don't think. Because the strange thing about this incarnation is it runs parallel with her. So nobody would believe me when I told them any of this. It was kind of designed that way. So Gillian was 12 when that lifetime died, but because the lives never meet, it didn't matter. It didn't make any real difference in the grand scheme of things. So yeah, I basically didn't do anything about that other than find out they were all right, and then I let them be. I didn't remember any of this until years and years and years into this lifetime. And I'm skipping a whole lot. So I'm going to end this bit now. It suffice to say that this is basically what happened prior to this lifetime. And then I'm going to forget that we've discussed this, and I'm going to start from the beginning of this lifetime and show you how it comes into play within this life, because it did have a very big effect on this lifetime in some respects, which it will be easier if I tell it in the order it happened in. So that's my past life. I'll come back to this one later.